car market experienced an aggressive correction from its pandemic price top, costing owners tens and thousands of dollars. Taycans lost, for example, $85,000 in a short time, and C8 Corvettes $34,000.
But you don't need to lose that much. In fact, you don't need to lose anything at all.
Many sports and supercars just started to increase in value or bottomed out, and buying one of these cars maximizes your chances of losing nothing at all.
Of course, this includes cars of hundreds and thousands of dollars, but also cars that are much more affordable.
Stay tuned if you want to know which cars belong to this elite group, because we'll cover the latest price developments in this video.
But let's first contextualize the current market situation.
During the pandemic, demand surged and supply plummeted, causing an upward spiral in the price trends. Every car seemed destined for profit, and there was no shortage of speculators trying to exploit this.
Prices for some cars increased by more than 40%.
The party ended in the first half of 2022. Price trends started to flatten and eventually topped. Well into 2022, most cars started to depreciate again, and they did so at above average rates.
Double-digit losses were no exception.
Late 2023 though, things started to normalize again. Depreciation rates returned to single digits and the market normalized. It's not just my data on sports and supercars that indicates this. Also the Haggerty market rating, a measure that tracks the status of the collector car market in terms of activity or heat, shows that the market returned from the overheated area to the normal area. Also the Haggerty market index shows that values dropped from their peak and are decreasing less quickly than during last year.
And that brings us to today. Today's market is characterized by relatively normal depreciation rates, but of course, there are exceptions on the positive and the negative side.
During the 2022 market correction, very few cars continue to show stable or increasing price trends. Now though, with a more normal market, we can find again slightly more cars with stable or increasing trends. Let's have a look at some data. Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 7.6%, and most cars lost between 2.5 and 13%. We can see that the variation on the negative side is relatively large. Some cars lost up to 30%. On the positive side, we find a lot of cars for which prices increased by approximately 0 to 5%. Some of the increases might be real increases, while others could be the result of chance. As we move to the right, we can see that the number of cars with big increases decreases quickly. Only approximately 10 models increased by more than 5%.
Provided that you're a value-conscious buyer, you of course want to buy a car that falls on the right-hand side of the 0 point. If you couldn't care less about depreciation, this video, and probably the whole channel, might not be to your liking.
So let's have a look at the cars for which prices increased. I divided them into 3 price categories. Cars up to $50,000, between $50,000 and $150,000, and everything above. First up in the category till $50,000 is of course the Miata. To be more specific, the first generation. We can see that prices have been increasing steadily since the beginning of 2023, and that the median price currently sits at roughly $14,000. This is a lot more than the $8,700 at the beginning of the pandemic. It is also 0.4% more than last year. That's not a lot, and this change is then also not statistically confirmed. It could be the result of chance. However, I think it's fair to say that prices at least have been stable. There are 2 things to keep in mind though. This applies especially to low mileage examples, meaning cars with less than 56,000 miles. And it's before any inflation adjustment. Adjusting for inflation, we're looking at a loss of minus 2.1%.
The next car is far from being a sports or supercar, but it has a group of dedicated fans. That's why I included it. It's the Land Cruiser J80.
Prices arrived at approximately $26,000, and this is 8.5% more than last year. As you can see, there is some uncertainty in the trend. The volatility is rather high, resulting from a big price difference between the cars in top-notch condition and the ones that require a bit of love. Also, supply can fluctuate a lot. The 8.5% increase before inflation adjustment, 5.7% after adjustment, is then also not statistically confirmed.
Next up is the 987.1 Cayman.
We can see that prices arrived at $32,000 for an S model and $26,000 for a base model. These numbers are 4 and 4.1% higher than last year. Looking backwards in time, we can see that values drifted lower during the market correction in 2022, but stabilized by the end of 2023. The trends that you see are then also similar to the ones in the 986 and 987 Boxster market. The 4 and 4.1% increases that we see over here could be the result of chance. I recommend to check out this video if you want to know more about the Boxster or Cayman prices.
Also 911s from the 996 generation are doing relatively well. They're not increasing in value, but depreciating at a rate close to 0%.
Looking for example at the 996.2 base model, we can see that prices sit now at approximately $33,000. This is 2.4% lower than last year, but similar to the changes that we saw before, it's not statistically confirmed. This matches with what we see in the price trend. Relatively stable prices since 2023.
Looking at the next category, the cars between $50,000 and $150,000, there's again no shortage of Porsches. That market is simply extremely strong at the moment. We covered it many times on the channel.
I'll therefore not cover all the Porsche models in this category. You can have a look at the Porsche playlist on my channel to get the latest numbers on the 911s, Boxsters and Caymans. Instead, I'll focus on the cars that are not so frequently mentioned.
There's for example only one video on the GT500.
The price trend though showed an interesting turn, pushing prices up to roughly $99,000. This is 1.3% or $1,300 higher than 1 year ago before inflation adjustment and minus 1.2% after adjustment. Contrary to many of the price changes that we saw before, this one is unlikely to be the result of chance since the change is statistically confirmed. Looking at the historical development, we can see that prices corrected in the second half of 2022. This is the same as in the rest of the market. In the end of 2023, they started to stabilize, and during 2024, this turned into an increase. Zooming into the split by model year, we can see that it are the 2020 and 2021 cars that are responsible for the price increase. 2022 cars remain stable.
Next up is a car that we also covered in last week's video, the F355.
We can see that prices for automatic Spyders have been stable and are hovering between $90,000 and $115,000. There's some fluctuation in this trend due to the small market size. The year-over-year increase of 3.2% does then also need to be interpreted with care. It's not statistically confirmed, and I would label this market as stable instead of increasing. Another Ferrari that is doing well in this price category is the FF. With a median price of $149,000, it just manages to stay under the $150,000 threshold. The price increase of 1.3% before inflation adjustment isn't super large and could be the result of chance. We can see that the FF market corrected in line with the general market trend during the second half of 2022 and entered a new phase during 2023. Prices are a bit volatile because the market is small, but it's clear that the downward trend broke.
And that brings us to the Porsches, but not the 911.
The 718 Boxsters are performing quite well. Is it because the next one will be electric or simply the result of price increases? It doesn't matter so much if you already own one because price trends are strong. We can see that 4-liter GTSs increased by 3% and 4-cylinder GTSs by 1.1%. After inflation adjustment, these rates decreased to 0.4 and minus 1.4%. Both changes aren't statistically confirmed. The trends are then also more flat than they are pointing upwards. Of course, also 996 turbo base models are doing well. They are one of the few cars that are still extremely close to their pandemic market top, and this applies to both manuals and automatics. Prices arrived at $73,500, 2.5% more than 1 year ago, and this change is on the border of being statistically confirmed. This is then also one of the few cars for which prices are higher than before the pandemic after applying an inflation correction. Also, the regular 911s are performing well. We can see that 991 and 997 Carrera S's basically flatlined after a small correction in the second half of 22. 991.2s are up by 0.9% and .1s by 1.3%. For the 997s this is 0.1% and minus 2.4%. But again, none of these changes are statistically confirmed. The development is more flat than increasing.
And with that we arrive at the last category, the cars above $150,000.
Over here we find, for example, the SLS AMG. Base models are up by 3.3%, GTs by 8.4%, and Black Series by 0.1%. Especially when we talk about the Black Series, we need to be careful with these trends. At that level in the market, these trends become less informative, as the price uncertainty increases drastically. The trend for the base model I trust a lot more, as supply is much higher and price is much lower. Yet, the price increase could still be the result of chance. After inflation adjustment, it's by the way still positive at a plus of 0.7%. Of course, also the 458 belongs in this category. We can see that just as in the rest of the market, 458 prices corrected. Make no mistake, even this model isn't immune to market corrections. Yet, contrary to many other cars, they didn't continue to drop. Coupes stabilized at approximately $220,000 and Spyders at $260,000. Since mid-2023, prices hardly changed. Coupes decreased by 3.2%, while Spyders are up by 2.4%. Also, the Pista Coupes are doing well. Prices are up by 0.6%, but the price changes aren't statistically confirmed for both mid-engine Ferraris.
Of course, we also find again some Porsches in this category.
The 991 Speedster, for example. Also, this car corrected in 2022, but like the other ones, stabilized during 2023. They increased by 1.3% during last year, bringing the price level up to approximately $390,000. But again, this movement could be the result of chance. 991.2 GT2 RS prices are also stable, or perhaps even increasing. Last year, prices increased by 8.6% or $32,600. This is a borderline case in terms of being statistically significant. The increase is mainly driven by the low mileage cars, meaning the ones with less than 9.8 thousand miles. Cars with more miles were stable. 991.2 GT3s are also doing well. Prices have been on the rise since the beginning of 2023 and are approaching peak levels. Compared to last year, they're up by 1.6%. A small increase, but a stable increase. The 991.2 GT3 RS is also doing extremely well. Values are up by 2%, and this change is statistically confirmed, and brought prices up to $281,000. Similar to the GT3, prices have been stable since the beginning of 2023.
Let's wrap up. So which cars are skyrocketing in value? Well, perhaps none at the moment. Skyrocketing doesn't seem to be the appropriate term here.
Now, looking at all of the models that we covered, we can see that there are many cars for which prices increased. Only for a few of them though, it's unlikely that the change is the result of chance. These are the GT500, 991.2 GT3 RS, 991.2 GT2 RS and 996 Turbo. These prices are extremely strong given the current market.
Not such a surprising result, right? But it's not like values are flying up like we saw during the pandemic. It's a much more gradual increase.
It also doesn't mean that prices for the other cars aren't strong. On the contrary, prices for those cars bottomed out during last year, something that's quite unique in this market. As a value-conscious buyer, I would then also still consider them.
There's no way to predict if these cars will go up in the long term. We only looked at the past and didn't make any price predictions. Yet, buying any of them minimizes the likelihood of losing our fortune to depreciation, at least in the foreseeable future.
The price trends have some predictive power for the short-term future price development, but cannot predict the long term.
And with that we arrive at the end of the video. Now if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing car prices but would like to see a video for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find data-driven market analysis for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks for a fresh market update.